The cabin lights were dimmed to midnight blue, engines humming like a steady heartbeat. Everyone thought it was a peaceful cruise. Everyone but me. The "Occupied" sign on the forward lavatory had been glowing for almost 20 minutes. That was unusual, even for a nervous passenger. I'd stepped out of the cockpit to stretch my legs before the Atlantic stretch, expecting routine. What I found was the kind of turbulence no autopilot could smooth out. The door clicked. I froze. She came out first, Emma, my girlfriend, my flight attendant, the woman I'd trusted at 35,000 feet and everywhere below. Her hair was slightly out of place, her lipstick smudged. Behind her, a tall man in a pressed shirt adjusted his belt and smirked like he'd just gotten away with murder. For half a second, the world stopped spinning. The air felt thinner, drier. My hands went weightless. She gasped when she saw me standing there in my pilot uniform, shoulder stripes catching the faint cabin light. "Daniel," she started, voice trembling. The man chuckled softly. "Wrong move. Passengers in the nearby galley probably thought it was nothing, just crew movement." But I saw her face drain of color as she realized what I'd seen. I didn't say a word. I just looked past her, at him. Seat 14A. I'd greeted him before takeoff. The resemblance was uncanny, short beard, same jawline as her ex she swore she'd blocked. Of course. The universe has a dark sense of humor. "Get back to your seat, sir," I said quietly, coldly, captain tone engaged. He hesitated, then obeyed, arrogant grin fading once he realized who I was. Emma tried to follow me back toward the cockpit. "Please, Dan, it's not." I lifted a hand. "You'll speak to the purser. I'm flying this plane." Then I left. The cockpit door sealed behind me with that heavy, secure click I usually loved. This time, it sounded like a coffin lid. I sat there in silence, staring at the flight display. The captain gave me a quick nod, assuming I'd just stretched my legs. "All good?" he asked. "Perfect," I said. We had 4 hours to go. Every minute stretched like elastic. My headset buzzed with routine chatter, weather reports, coordinates, cabin requests, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying that scene again and again. Her laugh. His smirk. The tiny space where everything ended. At cruising altitude, a pilot learns calm discipline. Panic kills. Rage distracts. You compartmentalize. So I did what pilots do best, I planned. First step, maintain control. No drama in the cabin, no word to the crew yet. Second, make sure she feels the altitude she created. 2 hours later, turbulence hit. Nothing serious, but enough to require the crew to be seated. I clicked the intercom. "Cabin crew, take your seats immediately." Her voice came through the handset, small, fragile. "Copy, Captain." She wasn't in the cockpit to see me smile. I watched her on the small security monitor. She sat in her jump seat near the galley, hands folded, eyes down. The passenger from 14A glanced at her when the plane shook, trying to catch her attention. She didn't look up. She was trapped, in uniform, in guilt, and in a tin can 35,000 feet above the ocean. I let the turbulence ride longer than necessary before switching the seatbelt sign off. It wasn't dangerous. Just enough to remind her who was in control up here. When calm returned, I called the purser privately through the interphone. "Hey, check on Emma for me," I said evenly. "I think she's unwell. Might need to be reassigned from passenger service for the remainder of the flight." The purser agreed without question. Within minutes, Emma was told to remain in the galley, grounded for the rest of the trip. I glanced again at the monitor. Her head was bowed, shoulders stiff. Good. Let her feel it. Then came the passenger, seat 14A, ringing his call button. I waited a moment before responding through the speaker. "Passenger 14A, this is the cockpit. Please refrain from unnecessary use of the call button during night service." He froze, startled. His light went out. That little power, that tiny slice of control, tasted better than any revenge I'd imagined. 3 hours in, I couldn't hold the silence anymore. I patched into the cabin PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. We're currently cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet, expecting an on-time arrival. To our cabin crew, thank you for your professionalism tonight." A pause. The whole crew knew who was being addressed. She did too. That was my first strike. Quiet, public, surgical. When I turned off the mic, the captain gave me a curious look. "Everything all right between you two?" he asked softly. I forced a smile. "It will be by landing." The seatbelt sign chimed again as we started descent. Outside the windshield, dawn painted the Atlantic gold. Inside, I felt nothing but frost. By the time we touched down, everyone would think it was just another smooth flight. But before that landing gear hit the ground, I was going to make sure the two people who'd treated me like turbulence understood what it feels like to fall. Because revenge, at altitude, comes without warning. The cabin was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peace so much as the calm before something breaks. I tasted coffee and old metal. The captain kept his hand steady on the yoke. Outside, the ocean rolled away like a sheet of black glass. Inside, everything felt small and cheap, like a lie folded into a pocket and left to fester. I called the purser on the interphone. Her voice was bright, automatic. "Prue, come to the cockpit for a second." She arrived with her clipboard like a shield. Up close she looked older, tired in that professional way the long-haul crew do. I told her, flat, what I'd seen. No drama, no accusation, just facts. Who, where, when. I didn't want gossip. I wanted procedure. She blinked, then nodded. Understood. I'll handle it. There are rules for everything in aviation, because if you lose discipline, you lose safety. And if you can weaponize procedure, it makes for an exact kind of revenge, clean, indisputable, surgical. I asked her to follow protocol, log the incident, reassign the crew member from passenger service, and request passenger cooperation for a security check upon landing. I also asked, quietly, that she inform the other senior cabin staff so no one would act on impulse. She took the tablet from me, fingers moving across the screen. Service logs, call button timestamps, crew assignments, all of it was there, neat and timestamped. The forward lavatory had been occupied, the call button from 14A had been used during that window. Not proof of sex, obviously, but a paper trail that said the passenger and the lavatory had a coincident timeline. In aviation, timelines are everything. Keep this quiet for now, I said. We land in 3 hours. We handle it on the ground. But I need you to remove Emma from passenger-facing duties. No announcements about personal matters. Official tone only. She looked at me with that mixture of respect and the private knowledge that pilots have a way of setting things in motion. Copy. I walked back to my seat and felt the plane like a living thing beneath me, obedient, patient. The whole point of what I was doing was to let the aircraft carry the truth to the ground slowly, like a confession that had to be heard by enough ears to matter. A little later, I made another call to the purser. Initiate a routine security check in the cabin. Nothing alarming, just a standard ID check for some passengers. Use the intercom. Ask seat 14A to come to the galley for a brief paperwork check. He'll cooperate. She paused, but she knew what I meant. Copy. I'll do it with the usual phrasing. Her voice came over the PA, calm, corporate. Ladies and gentlemen, as part of our routine post-service checks, we will be performing a brief passenger verification in the cabin. Passenger in 14A, could you please make your way to the galley? Our crew will assist you. Thank you for your cooperation. It was innocuous. It sounded like the airline's version of small talk. But the point was exposure, not spectacle. The moment 14A stood and walked, the aisle filled with small, curious sounds, a dropped magazine, a cough, a phone screen lit like a tiny accusation. Eyes found them. Whispers spread like static. When he reached the galley, the purser greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sir, we just need to verify your details for the paperwork. Flight number and passport, please. She asked it like a clerk, not a judge. He fumbled for his wallet, that same arrogant ease gone. His hands were suddenly human. The other flight attendants hovered, professional and adrift. Emma stood near the service area, supposed to be off-duty now, but she was still in uniform, visible, exposed. For a wild second she tried to step forward, to rescue him with a practiced crew smile. The purser put a discreet hand on her shoulder, keeping her back. I watched on the small crew monitor, not CCTV, but the purser's reflected face in a chrome panel, and felt the cold satisfaction of a plan executed without shouting. Sir, the purser said, voice low so the galley cameras wouldn't pick it up, we don't have live video feeds to the cockpit, what we have here is human testimony and log records. Because of an incident reported involving a crew member and a passenger, ground security will be meeting this flight. We need your cooperation. Please remain by the galley until we land. The man stared at her like she was the one who had lost something. Around us, the cabin softened into a bank of attention. People returned to their phones, but the atmosphere had changed. The man at 14A saw faces turn toward him and understood, intimacy is a private thing until it isn't. Then it becomes spectacle. Emma's hands trembled. For the first time since I met her, she was not in control of the narrative. The uniform that used to be a halo looked like armor cracked at the seams. She mouthed something to me as she walked back to the galley, maybe apology, maybe plea. I didn't respond. The cockpit was a place where emotions had to be filtered through instruments. I set the autothrottle and monitored the glide path. The plane demanded my competence, and I gave it to her. The purser, precise and humane, briefed Emma quietly, away from passengers. We have a report, she said. You will be removed from service for the remainder of the flight. You'll fill out an incident form and speak with the senior purser on arrival. Ground security has been notified. There was no cruelty in it, just the formality of consequences. Emma's face crumpled into a small, private ruin. She tried to explain. It's not, I mean, her words fell apart. The purser held up a hand. We will do this by the book. The man in 14A looked at Emma and then at me. For the first time his smirk had been replaced by a question. How had everything gone so wrong so fast? He opened his mouth, something defensive, but the purser closed it with a polite, professional smile. Sir, please remain seated, she said. We will handle this. I could have dragged them both into the cockpit, screamed, made every passenger a witness. That would have been messy and human and useless. Instead I kept the cockpit door closed like a surgeon's drape. I let the crew do their work. I let the airline's rules do my anger for me. Down below, the world turned toward our ETA. Up here, I watched a woman I loved shrink under the weight of her choices, and a passenger realized that his adventure had consequences. We began our descent with the cabin tense as a held breath. The purser's crew logged the incident, time-stamped with the same pitiless accuracy as our flight data. Paperwork doesn't lie. Passengers with nothing to do replayed the scene silently like a movie. I felt the kind of calm that isn't peace so much as the readiness of a man who has set something into motion and must now watch it complete itself. Outside, the runway waited like a judge. Inside, the story I'd uncovered in a lavatory was transitioning from secret to record. I tightened my grip on the yoke and watched the horizon fold itself into the promise of consequences. By the time we crossed the coastline and the city lights winked awake, I knew what would happen on the ground. I had no illusions that the airline's response would be swift or brutal. But procedure was a blade that cut both ways. It would take care of the rest. And for the first time since I opened that lavatory door, I felt something besides fury, a cold, empty clarity. The plane would land. People would step off. Life would continue. But some people would leave the aircraft carrying the weight of those 35,000 feet of lies. The captain's voice broke the silence. Begin descent checklist. I nodded, hands on the throttle, eyes on the altimeter. Outside, dawn had turned to gold. Inside, everything was still frozen. Emma was in the galley again. Her headset was off. She looked small in the corner of the monitor, hands clenched, pretending to fill out paperwork. The purser stood nearby, polite but unyielding. Passenger 14A sat alone now, staring straight ahead. The arrogance was gone. Shame does that to people when there's nowhere to run. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. My voice was steady. She flinched when she heard it through the intercom. The captain asked quietly, "You sure you're okay to land, Dan?" "I'm fine," I said. And I was, calm like ice just before it cracks. At 10,000 feet, the city rose through the haze, a scatter of orange lights and morning fog. The seatbelt sign chimed. I pressed the PA again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be on the ground in about 15 minutes. Cabin crew, secure the cabin. And Emma, make sure the galley is locked." Only one name. Deliberate. Every crew member heard it. Every passenger who'd noticed the drama earlier heard it too. The air grew heavier. I watched her on the monitor as she froze mid-motion. The purser's eyes flicked to her, silent question. Emma gave a tiny nod and moved to latch the galley door. She was trembling. I let the silence hang, long enough for her to feel it. The captain began the final approach. Flaps 30. Gear down. The runway stretched ahead like judgment waiting. 5 minutes from touchdown, I keyed the interphone one last time. Purser to cockpit. She entered, calm but tight-lipped. "Security has been notified," she said quietly. "Ground team will meet us at gate D12. "Good," I said. "Keep her in the galley after landing until they arrive. Passenger 14A stays seated until escorted. Follow the book." She hesitated. "Dan, are you sure you want it this public?" I looked out the windshield at the runway lights sliding closer. "She made it public," I said. "I'm just keeping the record straight." We touched down smooth. Perfect landing. The captain smiled, oblivious. "Nice one." "Thanks," I murmured. "Auto brake too." As we taxied to the gate, I switched the intercom on one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Miami. On behalf of the crew, thank you for flying with us. Please remain seated until we reach the gate." Then, after a pause that everyone felt, "Cabin crew, please remain at your stations for a crew debrief on arrival." Her punishment hidden inside professionalism. It sounded ordinary. It wasn't. At the gate, engines whined down. The jet bridge creaked. Passengers unbuckled, chatter starting again, relief flooding the air. Through the tiny monitor, I saw the security officers step aboard, 2 men in navy vests with airport badges. The purser met them, said a few words, pointed discreetly toward the galley. They nodded. Passenger 14A stood too early. "Sir, please remain seated," one officer said, firm but polite. He sat. Sweat on his temple. Emma looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The officers moved first to her. They didn't grab her, just spoke quietly, handed her a form. She nodded, eyes glassy. They guided both of them toward the front exit, separate aisles, separate shame. As the last passenger left, the captain unbuckled. "You staying for debrief?" "Yeah," I said. "Just need a minute." He left. I stayed, watching through the open cockpit door as Emma passed by one final time, escorted by security. She looked at me, just a flicker, wet eyes, trembling lips. There was no plea, no excuse left to give. Just the silent understanding that altitude doesn't forgive weakness. When the cabin emptied, the purser returned, closing the door softly behind her. "It's done," she said. "They'll handle it. HR, security, all of it." I nodded. "Thank you for keeping it clean." She gave me a long look. "You could have humiliated her worse." "I didn't need to," I said. "She did it herself." She nodded once and left me alone in the cockpit. For a while I sat there, headset off, just listening to the engines cooling down. The aircraft always had this heartbeat after landing, the soft ticking of metal contracting, like sighs of relief. I ran my fingers over the throttle levers one last time. Control restored. Mission complete. Out on the tarmac, a security cart rolled away, 2 figures inside. One in uniform, one in handcuffs. I didn't ask who wore which. Before leaving, I filled out my own report. Nothing emotional. Just facts. Incident observed involving crew member and passenger 14A. Security informed. Crew reassigned. Flight landed safely. No adjectives. No anger. Just altitude and truth. When I finally stepped off the jet bridge, sunlight hit my face like a slap. The smell of jet fuel mixed with morning air. I walked past the crowd without looking back. Pilots are trained to keep flying even when systems fail. But that day I learned something else. Sometimes you have to crash one relationship to keep yourself airborne. Next flight departs in 12 hours. And I'll be ready. Airports have a strange kind of silence after sunrise. Not real silence, there's always the hum of engines, the hiss of air conditioning, the shuffle of rolling suitcases, but the kind that comes when adrenaline drains out and leaves only fatigue. By the time I reached the crew office, the adrenaline was gone. Only the memory of the flight remained, her pale face in the galley, his nervous smirk fading, the way the cabin felt heavier than air. I filed my report. The purser's version matched mine line for line. No embellishments, no gossip, just timestamps, procedure, professionalism. That's the thing about aviation, truth is logged automatically. 2 hours later, they called me into the debrief room. A man from corporate security sat there, crisp suit, badge, polite but cold. Next to him, the chief purser and an HR officer. They didn't waste time. "We've confirmed the incident. Passenger 14A has been detained by airport police under misconduct statutes. The cabin crew member involved, Emma, has been suspended pending review." "Detained?" I asked, tone neutral. "Yes, Captain Daniels. The passenger assaulted a crew member mid-flight, at least that's what the initial statement says. We'll determine if it was consensual. Either way, it's a violation of federal air regulations." Assault. That wasn't the word I expected. Maybe she tried to save herself by twisting the narrative. Or maybe she realized that admitting the truth would end her career faster than Turbulence drops altitude. They asked me for one last confirmation. "Did you see the act?" "No," I said honestly. "I saw them exit the lavatory. I recognized the signs. You can read the logs." The HR officer nodded, eyes sympathetic but detached. "That's enough." They thanked me for professionalism and dismissed me. The whole thing lasted 10 minutes. 10 minutes to close a chapter of 3 years. I found her waiting in the corridor outside. Out of uniform now, just jeans, sweater, and the look of someone who'd fallen out of the sky. "Dan," she said quietly. I stopped a few feet away. The same distance as the aisle between us on the plane. "You've already said enough," I told her. She shook her head. "Please. I need you to know it wasn't what I think." I finished. "You were in a locked lavatory with a passenger for 20 minutes. I think that's exactly what it was." Her eyes brimmed but didn't spill. "He looked like my ex. I was drunk on the layover, and I don't even know why I." "Don't," I said. "Don't insult both of us with reasons." She flinched. "They're going to fire me." "Probably," I said. "You risked 300 lives for a moment of thrill. The uniform isn't a costume, it's a contract." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The corridor smelled like coffee and disinfectant. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "You humiliated me." I met her gaze, steady. "No, Emma. You humiliated yourself. I just didn't cover for you. Then I turned and walked away. 2 days later, I got the follow-up notice from corporate security. Passenger 14A identified as Richard Holt, U.S. citizen. Charged under 49 U.S. Code Section 46504, interference with flight crew members. Lifetime ban from the airline network. Case referred to federal authorities. They didn't mention the other detail, but I'd already heard it through crew channels. He'd been traveling under an alias, and yes, he was her ex. The resemblance wasn't coincidence. He'd booked the flight because she'd told him her schedule. I don't know if she realized that when she let him in that lavatory. Maybe she thought it would be their secret. Secrets don't survive altitude. A week later, my flight director called me in again. Dan, she said gently, the company appreciates how you handled things. You followed protocol, avoided disruption, and protected passenger safety. You'll receive commendation for crisis management. I nodded. Commendations don't feel like victory. They feel like post-crash reports, clean text covering wreckage. She hesitated before adding, Emma resigned this morning. I didn't ask for details. Some endings don't need them. That night, I walked through the empty terminal, rows of glass, reflections of planes sleeping under floodlights. I stopped at the observation deck. Beyond the windows, a 787 pushed back, taxi lights cutting through the mist. It used to thrill me, the thought of her back there somewhere, greeting passengers, smiling that practiced smile that once felt real. Now it was just another silhouette in motion. In aviation, when something goes wrong, we trace it back to the moment of failure. Not the crash, the first small deviation that led to it. For us, it wasn't the lavatory. It was the night she started texting an ex again, and I ignored the warning light. You don't lose altitude all at once. You descend quietly, a few feet at a time. I took a long breath, watched the jet roll into the dark, and whispered to no one, clear skies, Emma. Then I turned, walked back into the terminal, and checked the schedule. My next flight was at dawn. And this time, I'd be flying alone.